Hi, this is Jim Ruff, and I want to introduce this half-hour video, which was made 10 years ago. It's where Paul Everett, who was my boss at Simpson Timber Company when I developed Dynamic Facilitation. And he was, you can tell, he's a really supportive boss. And since I left the company at the early 80s, he's been to my seminar a couple of times. And we've stayed good friends. So he is now interviewing me. Let's see, this is 2005, so it's about 20 years after the fact. And now it's, of course, 10 years later than that. So anyway, this is Paul Everett interviewing me about the early days of dynamic facilitation.
Let's begin by saying just exactly what is dynamic facilitation that you have developed over the years?
Yeah, well, I didn't realize I was developing something when I started. To me, it was just facilitation, that I felt like I was facilitating. And it was only later that I looked back and realized, hey, this isn't at all like what those people who certify people in facilitation are talking about. It's really a different animal. That the best way to have a group process and have people come to agreement and to come up with a solution that everybody feels good about is to have a breakthrough. If everybody has that breakthrough together, or some kind of shift that may happen where everybody just kind of sees the same thing the same way, and we all just know what needs to happen, that's the best result. And what I'm saying is traditional facilitation really doesn't aim for that moment. It aims for a different kind of thinking and a different kind of process.
How is that different?
Well, they're really wanting you to be logical and to be dispassionate and to stick to the agenda and stay on task and to stop being so disruptive and things like that. Dynamic facilitation is saying, well, that urge that you have to speak up at this inopportune moment,
To be disruptive.
is actually an asset to having this creative breakthrough. So in dynamic facilitation, we are following the energy. So if you have energy to be disruptive, we're actually going, tell me what that concern is. Let me write that down. And tell me what's the idea behind that. We're trusting that the energy of people, is contributing to the problem, contributing to what we're working
to the solution of the problem,
the solution.
or whatever it is, or the breakthrough.
Yes.
The creation of a breakthrough, because that was my experience, was
Yes.
that it was more a creation of a breakthrough than it was a solution of a problem.
Well, that's true, yeah. And shifts, I mean, the outcomes of dynamic facilitation, I now realize are different. Sometimes you actually have a breakthrough solution. Other times you maybe have a change of heart where you thought these people were jerks before and now you kind of like them and you appreciate the fact that they're different. And that, all of a sudden, the problem goes away then too. I mean, another kind of breakthrough is that the fact that we're talking now, sometimes we create a we. I mean, that really wasn't there before. We didn't think it was possible. So in the instance of the Wisdom Council, there's a we the people. That's a new political entity that
And
could
that also
speak.
emerges from dynamic facilitation.
Dynamic facilitation, when you have that kind of shift process, there's this we, that we did this. We created something together that is not part and parcel of a deliberative process or a dialogue process necessarily, or even a creative problem-solving process. There's a quality of thinking in dynamic facilitation that we're aiming for a particular quality of thinking with all of us kind of looking at a problem together
And wrestling with it.
and wrestling with it
Yeah.
in a way that we expect some kind of shift to happen.
Okay.
And that's not what happens in the traditional thinking processes and facilitation is trying to keep people more on a linear thinking zone process. Keep people on track, don't get too far off thing, and where are we going, where are we now, having a strong agenda, letting extrinsic factors like an agenda be what controls things. And dynamic facilitation is really rooted in the idea of self-organizing change and trusting the self-organizing of my mind, which is creativity, or the self-organizing of my heart, which is I call it heart creativity. So.
Okay, so that gives me a nice segue to say, okay, we were talking about, you were talking about the second one, which was where people who used to be jerks aren't jerks anymore.
Right.
And that was really, as I remember it anyway, one of the antecedents of dynamic facilitation was our experience at the sawmill.
Yeah.
And I think we should talk about that a minute, because this sawmill was kind of unique. It was in Northern California. Jim was placed in that sawmill as a helper to the manager, so to speak, and the people. And Jim's charge, if we can say charge, was to make things better.
Yeah.
And so you began with kind of stumbling around a little. We did have that experience of bringing the sawmill from a low level of production to a much higher level of production in a very short time, which management didn't think could be done. So that created some believability,
yes,
we could say. But you did something that was really unique, which is that you helped the mill people get to work together better. And I would like you to discuss specifically, because this is the one, actually there's two of them particularly, but you can choose which one you want to talk about, or both, is the knuckle boom operator. And for those of you who don't know what a knuckle boom is, it's a big articulated arm that reaches over and grabs onto a log and picks it up and places it on a weigh chain that takes it into the barker. And you were working with the knuckle boom operator and the barkerman, both of whom hated each other vigorously, in a vigorous way. So now you need to tell that story.
Well, yeah, the nature of what we were doing was gathering these people at the operations center, and they were meeting and talking, and I was facilitating them in this way. Of course, these people did hate each other for a long time.
But why did they hate each other?
Well, I think people were just generally angry to begin with. The knuckle boom operator was the black sheep of the family and that sort of thing, I guess. But basically, they would look over and realize the other guy's doing something wrong, and he must be doing it to me on purpose. And the other guy would sit in his glass booth and say, that guy's doing something really stupid, and he's doing it to make me angry.
And he's damaging the logs.
And he's damaging the logs. And they go through this number on themselves and say, well, I just won't care about it. I won't put my emotional energy into that. But they would still get very angry, and they wouldn't talk to each other and so forth. So we, in this process of gathering people to work on solutions, work on problems, just working on them in this way together that we talked about, there would be breakthroughs. And I could even tell you one story about that. One of the issues was that I said, what are some of the issues we need to work on? And they said, well, cleanup. Cleanup is the biggest issue we've got. We need to hire another person to do cleanup. Well, and I would have them list the areas to clean up. And one of them was that this boom would get stuck because of all the junk there. And it would result in more conflict between the two guys, because the one guy would have to flip the logs around. These are massive logs. And they couldn't get through, and the other guy would have to help, but he wouldn't help. And so it was a real mess. But in terms of looking at this, the group would just look at the situation with new eyes, and they'd say, well, let's look at it. Let's go examine it. And do we really need that ledge there at all? And if we eliminate that ledge, we don't have any cleanup problem in that at all. And so they would eliminate that, for instance. And another story I think I will tell was that we were going to improve this operating center, and the guys seemed bored, and I said, well, what would help you not be bored? And they said, well, if we had sex or something, if some women were here or something like that. I said, well, let's just take a look at, let's just imagine that they are, and let's have sex with these women and describe what happens, and then see if we can't apply that to the barker. And sure enough, you know, they started talking about lubricants, and they started talking about
The barker, ripping the bark off. Yeah, yeah.
foreplay.
Yeah.
And they talked about things like that. And eventually having fun with this and working on these problems together and coming up with new ideas. And lo and behold, they became a we. They liked one another. They appreciated one another. And so they were double dating and things like that. And you know, you just think about the other big complaint they had was they needed more maintenance people. They needed to hire more maintenance people. Well, now they're not flipping these big logs around just because that other guy won't help out.
And things aren't getting broken.
Things aren't getting broken.
Marvelous.
So they don't need another maintenance guy just because they made friends.
Now, we need to connect that to why did dynamic facilitation grow out of that experience?
Well, to me, what happened was that I assumed that management had said, look, Jim, we don't want to do a normal quality circle program.
Right. And I didn't want you to do it either.
Well, we proposed that, but basically we thought they needed training first, and we thought that they needed management involvement.
Right.
And we thought the foreman certainly needed to be involved.
Right.
And we needed some things to make this system work. Well, management said, we don't care, just go make those people feel better. We're willing to pay your salary and their salary, make them feel better. And so we don't have so many grievances down at the union hall. That's all they really wanted. Well, that gave me a lot of latitude to play around.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, if I didn't have an idea about how to make that work, it could have actually not been a good idea to say, yeah, we'll do it. But I had this idea from, you sent me to training and about creative thinking, creative problem solving. I thought that the idea was if we could help people be creative, then it wouldn't matter all this other stuff.
That's right.
So that's where dynamic facilitation began, as I thought we really needed to just help these people be creative, and it would work. But the thing I didn't count on was that brainstorming and things like that don't work for people who don't care. I mean, they require a certain level of not caring. If you really care about something like the Palestinian-Israeli issue or something, those people really care, they don't want to do brainstorming. And a brainstorming doesn't work. So, and that's the way these people were. They were angry, and brainstorming requires you to think of lots of ideas off the top of your head. And so I had this idea of creativity being employed, but the tools that I had learned weren't really applicable. But at the same time, I was studying Jungian psychology, and I was involved in some dialogue processes, and I felt like these things were applicable. And so I tried to take what I'd learned from creative thinking processes and the dialogue processes and kind of combine them and just sort of jumble around and try different things until something did work. And that's how really dynamic facilitation got its start.
Talk about the lunchbox.
Well,
That lunchbox story is priceless.
well, I remember that we did create, from facilitating these groups of really burly, kind of angry people, holes punched in the walls and Coke machines kicked over and urine in the corners sometimes, and I mean, just angry people. And I was facilitating them to work on issues of their choice. And that was the key. This is, you know, they would be angry. They would say, I don't trust management. What are we doing here? I don't feel anything. And I'd say, well, here's the deal. If you want, you have the choice to be here and get paid and to work on issues that you care about. Management's making no promises. You just work on them.
And management's also not making any demands.
No demands, right. So you work on them and you come up with stuff, and you'll probably have the chance to influence management when you figure out what the answers are.
And get it implemented.
And possibly get it, and then it's up to you to get it implemented, or maybe management will, whatever.
Right.
So don't trust me, don't trust management, don't trust the company, just do what you want to do, and maybe you'll come up with something that excites you.
That must have jolted their minds just a little bit.
Yeah, that was great. So they would sit, when they first arrived, they would put their arms folded, and they'd all sit there and just kind of wait for me to do something. And usually plop their lunch pail right in front on the table. So they'd be sitting on the table. Everybody had a lunch pail right in front. And as we
put up the shield.
Put up the shield. And as we got talking, and we'd work this way, the lunchbox would go aside, and people would feel real related to one another, and we would make a lot of progress on issues, and it would be very exciting. But then there'd be some kind of shift or something, and one person would leave this group, and somebody else would come. And his first response was to put the lunch pail down and to fold his arms and to just sit there like they did at the beginning. And the thing that got me so riled about it is that everybody else would do the same thing. They would all put their lunch pails up.
So they'd regress.
They'd regress. Because there was now distrust in the environment.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't take very long. And of course, this is a key factor of dynamic facilitation, is when you start to bring out people's creativity, you make sure they never suffer punishment for it. You know, if somebody is creative, whenever somebody speaks creatively, they are vulnerable. Some slightest judgment, and they'll go through the floor. So most of us keep our creativity buried. We don't let it out because we want to be safe, because there's so much judgment around.
Because you'll be vulnerable.
You'll be vulnerable.
To somebody else's judging you on something.
Yes.
Yeah.
So whenever there's one lunch pail there, we all kind of put up our resistance again, or our protection. But the key piece of dynamic facilitation is, one is I call purging, where you try and get out what people really are thinking. Behind what they say they want, there's something that they really want, and help them bring that out. And the other piece is that once they say it, they have to be protected, so that there's no form or shape or anything of judgment, no judgment in the room at all.
And how do you do that? Remember, these folks come in not understanding the concept of deferral of judgment, the concept of holding the other in your heart, the concept of just waiting for waiting until as the Buddhists say, until your mud clears in the water, and so forth. They're not used to that. So how did you do that?
Well, see, this is a big difference.
You just talked about the fact that, hey, these guys regressed.
And it was brief, the regression, but the key thing to remember here is that we are not asking these people to manage themselves when they're facilitating. They are somewhat. They begin to self-manage somewhat, but it's really up to the facilitator to assure this safe environment. So when somebody, and this was so evident in the mill, I was able to watch these dynamics so clearly, is somebody would say an idea, and the first response of somebody would be to just blurt out, "That's the dumbest idea I've ever heard." Well, I would jump in and say, "Time out. You have a concern with that idea. Let me write down your concern." And then I would ask the other person who said the idea to flesh that out just a little bit more, so that they're kind of take them back to the moment before that judgment happened, to where they were rolling. And then we come back to the person that had that judgment and say, "Now what's the idea? What would be better from your mind? What would even be better?" So now they're speaking from their creative minds rather than their judging minds. And so it's constantly a matter of helping people be in their creative mind rather than their judging mind.
So the dynamic facilitator, one who's not you, me, for instance, has to understand that that's the environment that you're trying to create.
Exactly.
And they in turn have to be skilled at creating that environment, because what you just said is not how the usual facilitator would do it.
Right,
They would
right.
say, they'd quote some rule.
That's right. They say no. They do judgment themselves.
yeah.
No, you have broken the rule.
You've broken the rule
Now
about
get back.
judging. Stand back.
Right, now
Yeah.
get back. So
that would
that's
be
not
bummers,
that
see?
would be bummer. Right.
Yeah.
So we don't. That would be the standard approach. So people stay in their protected state, their
Yes.
adapted self, in a way. They stay there in a
And the
traditional.
person that made the thing doesn't put forth the idea. They don't ever get that healed in a way.
Right.
Okay. That allows them to come forth with more about it.
Right. If they don't get that healed, you watch their chair be rocking back and
Mm-hmm.
forth, or they'll have nervous fidgeting, and they're just it doesn't go away. And it
Yeah.
comes in later. They'll get revenge.
Yes.
Sometime later when the other guy has an idea, and that's what sort of the normal meeting happens.
So then dynamic facilitation then not only is about creating breakthroughs, which is a wonderful outcome, but it's also about healing the organization.
Yes, and even healing within people.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you're doing is you're helping people to realize what they're really saying
Mm-hmm.
and what they're really thinking. Because people basically draw kind of a wall around their ideas so that they keep what they really think secret from themselves too.
Mm-hmm.
They forget what they really think. And we all do. So there's a healing process in the group, in people, in themselves, and it really is a transformational process.
Mm-hmm.
We're relying on people to self-organize. We're relying on creativity is the self-organizing process in the mind and the heart.
It's in the universe.
In the universe. And what we're doing is aiming to create a space for that and trusting that. So we're not trusting our agenda so much that's preconceived. We're trusting that energy. Now what the problem is, see, just as an aside, is that this process then our unconscious tells us about stuff that is maybe politically not such a great thing to remember. We all live in a world where we've just kind of put aside things and hold
Pieces
them
of
back.
ourselves.
Pieces of ourselves that we hold back.
We've segmented.
We just put it away.
Yeah.
And we say, I won't worry about the world peace right now.
Right.
I won't worry about the threat of terrorism right now. I'll just go have fun. And yet these things are there. And when we follow energy, these things come back. And we start realizing, hey, this is a real problem. It really bothers me. It needs solving.
Okay, so now we have a sort of like a caveat about a dynamic facilitation, which is that it brings up uncomfortable energies, uncomfortable thoughts, things that you might think you're not supposed to have. So now the question is, how do you organize a dynamic facilitation session that provides a crucible or a container for those thoughts and yet kind of moves through, what kind of let's see, I'm thinking of a coil spring, of a continually rising circle process do you use to bring, say, somebody like, I went through your 4-day thing in '96 and then I had to come back and do it again because I'm so dense. And so what kind of process do you use to contain those anguishes?
Well, the thing is that, we have to stop pretty soon, but we really trust the creative energy. It really isn't containing it. It's really trusting. And what happens is that even though these issues may come up that are discomforting or whatever, the energy comes with a hint about how to work it through. So one of the things that I've noticed about this process that's really incredible is that a group might start on a small issue. And they might realize that's not the real issue. The real issue is much bigger. It's this issue. Now you would think that would be depressing to people. And it's the opposite.
Very energizing then, huh?
It's energizing. Well, that's the way the creativity works. This process works. It helps you find the system. This way, your energy when you're you find the elephant in the room.
Then it's taking care of the bounded instability then.
Yes.
That's what you have to have then.
Right.
That's really what you're saying,
Right.
is you're dealing with bounding the instability of whatever is going to emerge. You know something will, but you don't know where it went.
You don't know something, yeah,
It's like
something
chaos
will
theory,
emerge,
that's what it is.
and something does emerge,
Yeah.
and it's exhilarating.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's like now I'm working on what I really need to be working on.
Yeah.
And it feels good, as opposed to having it hidden. And yet, if there's a chaotic, struggly moment when before you really face these issues, and you realize this is the real issue, and now you're working on a challenge.
Yeah.
It's exciting to work on a challenge. It's healing to work on a challenge, and it's healing when everybody pitches in to work on it. Now, as long as we have systems in place that are really help us stay in denial, you see, we'll never have that.
Yeah.
And that's the key about dynamic facilitation.
So that's really great for dynamic facilitation.
Well, it is. I think, and see, the key, and we got to stop, but the core quality of thinking that dynamic facilitation elicits is this way of finding these, going through that struggly piece, but finding that path with heart. And even though it's kind of bad news in a sense, it's really exhilarating. And so that's, I guess we have to stop there and just kind of realize that's the situation.
It's been fun, Jim. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you, Paul.
inviting me up.
Oh, I'm really
Appreciate
happy
it.
that you came. Thanks, Paul. So this is the way my television show normally ends. I'm really glad you had a chance to meet Paul Everett. He was a great manager for me, and I worked for Simpson for about 7 years, ending in the end of 1984. And Paul and I really worked well together, and I hope you had a manager in your life that was as supportive as Paul was to me.